Hey guys, my name is Athos Sierra and I'm a developer from Breaze Home 4.0. My mentor is Aaron Fang, a research assistant at FIU, and my product owner is Dr. Masood Sajadi, a professor at FIU. I'm currently doing a video on AngularJS with IntelliJ being my IDE in our VM or virtual machine. In my case, I'm using Parallels, another type of VM machine. The purpose for this video is to expose front-end development by using different AngularJS concepts and features with BreazeHome as an example. Before anything, I'd like to run both the backend and the front end of BreazeHome. If you need any help, another team member has shown us how to set up BreazeHome using a different IDE in Eclipse, which ultimately is very similar in terms of setting up BreazeHome with IntelliJ. If any issues on how to set up BreazeHome with IntelliJ being your IDE, another team member also has included a tutorial on how to do so. Now that we have both the front end and back end running, I can now continue with the presentation. Alright, now let's get started. This is a table of contents of which these are the topics I will speak about during this presentation. What is AngularJS? AngularJS is an open source web application framework maintained by Google. It addresses many challenges encountered in developing single-page applications. It aims to simplify both the development and the testing of such applications by providing a framework for client-side model view controller or MVC architecture, along with components commonly used in rich internet applications. Therefore, having knowledge in HTML is a big deal since features in AngularJS help manipulate and extend HTML code. Why is AngularJS useful? It provides extended features such as dependency injection, routing, animations, viewer orchestration, and more. It allows different ways to do the same things, thus accommodating to particular development styles and tasks. There's no need to use observable functions that requires less writing, the code is cleaner, easier to understand, and less error prone. Complexity is also a factor, and is much faster since Angular modifies the page's data object model directly instead of adding inner HTML code. AngularJS teaches the browser new syntax through a construct we call directives, which leads to first to talk about directives. Directives is the main part about AngularJS, in which we use directives in our template code to build an AngularJS application. Directives are very unique and a powerful feature. Directives are markers on a DOM element such as attribute, element name, comment, or CSS class that tell AngularJS HTML compiler to attach a specified behavior to that DOM element. It lets you invent new HTML syntax only specific to your application. As seen in the picture, AngularJS directives has applications as ngapp and ngController, which are the main NGs. The forms, the different types of forms, the different type of templates, operations, and bindings. I will get further into that. As a reference, I'd like to show you guys a website, angularjs.org. If you go to the develop tag and go to API reference, here we find a list of directives pertaining to AngularJS, which there is a variety of ng directives. Ng is short for Angular. Here are all the types of directives: ngapp, bind, blur, change, check, class, click, cloak, controller, so on. Disabled, hide. In terms of Breaze Home, we also have a variety of directives. To name a few, I will open this file under Breeze Desktop. You go Apps, Scripts, Directives, and pick any of these. I'll pick range-selector.js. This is good exposure towards how an implementation of a directive is used by Angular scripts. In terms, this directive has a dropdown, which a dropdown is actually, in terms of our Breaze Home, can be this. That's a dropdown. We then have filters. Core filters are available in the ng module, which I'll explain in a bit what is a module in AngularJS. And filters are used to transform template data before it's rendered within directives and expressions. We use frequently known filters such as time zones, date, and even switch strings to number formats. In this case, if you go to filters and you go to date with tz.js, which is JavaScript, you have here a filter function applying a constant time zone with the UTC and time zone with the format, as explained. Our next topic is very simple. As explained from the folder, filters. Filters are formatting feature added to AngularJS expressions or directives to display data for the user. Filters can also change to take optional arguments by using the pipe character. Different types of filters are shown in the picture. Uppercase, lowercase, currency, number, date. It's basically the format of a type of string, number, or an array. Our next topic is very simple. It's known as data binding. Data binding is a particular AngularJS point of JavaScript code when executed. It dramatically improves performance. In other words, the process of establishing a connection between the UI application and business logic. In these terms, data binding is shown here in the picture. You have a type input text, an ng model user name, and there's a two-way data bind. So when you say hello, it displays a name, and the data bind is using the username of the user to data bind according to the ID of who's being called. For example, if we head to views and we can click on results.html, the first thing that pops up here is results filters button. Basically, in the results page, it's going to be a button row. From here, the results filter header button in the column number 4, the data binding is options total price minimum, which is data binding wherever this is being called in the row to data bind the option of the total price according to what the user clicks. You will see a lot of data binding. For example, if you go to results page and you go to the filters under listing type, in order to find the listing type is being data binded by the name. So whoever is checked is going to get clicked on, and the type name will get data binded by the click of the check. For example, under Breaze Home, if you go under the filters menu, you will see that in property type, you are clicking either apartment, condo, house, but by the click, you're data binding the actual property type towards the actual check mark. This leads us to speak about views. Views in AngularJS is the basic understanding of what a user may see or interact with a web application setting. As seen in the picture, view is where HTML and CSS interact with each other to have a visual appearance. As you can see, the Angular, this is an MVC model, so MVC, the Angular is what connects the view and the model, or the model to the view, sorry. The view is the HTML and CSS, which the user sees. The controller is what controls the model. It's a whole cycle, basically. The controller will always have the JavaScript, basically all the functions, the API calls, and everything from the server. It will then go to the model, and the model will go to the view. The view is what the user actually interacts with. So as said here, the layers, the view is the visual appearance, the model is the data model of the application, the controller adds the behavior. Therefore, in the workflow, user interacts with the view, changes the model, calls the controller, which is the data binding, as shown in the previous example. Controller manipulates the model, interacts with the server, and the AngularJS detects the model. Two-way data binding. Which in Breaze Home, under the views folder, and it has all the HTML source codes for each section in the web application. Having a view tag can simply create a placeholder where a corresponding view can be placed based on the configuration. Therefore, as seen here in the Breaze Home, we have the about, the admin, all the HTMLs. I won't get into the models yet. But here is basically everything that the user is going to display and interact with in terms of Breaze Home. Now we talk about controllers, which we just finished talking about views. Therefore, we stay in this slide so I can continue talking about controllers now. Controllers are what controls the flow of data in the web application. It basically defines the application's behavior, maps users' actions to its model, which a model is where all the business logic occurs. And lastly, controllers also select views for response. As seen in the source code of landing.html, which is the visual aspect, the actual control of the application is written in a landing.js file, and it is defined using an Angular controller directive. So if you go on the Breaze Home desktop again, and you scroll down to controllers, you can find what actually controls this landing HTML file, which is right here. You will see all the functions. So you have here the controller, the controller's name, the function with all the parameters that are being called for each function. And as you scroll down, you will see the location and path, and so on and so forth. The properties, the storage. Luckily, past developers have put comments in order for you guys to actually be aware of what's going on through each function. In my case, I actually implemented a small if statement, which is to toggle the login. Therefore, when I actually click on a property, so basically when I actually click on one of the properties with the hide button, it comes to this page, it gets directed, and this drop down pops down. That's what this root scope to login, toggle logins is for. To sum up the picture of AngularJS architectural pattern, MVC, now we get into how views and controllers interact with scopes, which each controller accepts scopes as parameters to refer to the application that the controller is trying to control. For example, anything with the $sign. As read in the PowerPoint, scopes are used to communicate views and controllers. Scopes objects in the model and is a JS object, therefore it needs to be initialized. Initialize in some ways that you could say from scope dot properties equals false, or so on and so forth to claim a function, but no matter what, it has to be initialized. It will then house both the data and the function that is viewed in the views. For example, in Breaze Home, as you'll see, it will have scope objects to bind HTML views and controllers, basically like a placeholder. So here you go. As shown, scope.search equals text. If location path, same thing. It's kind of like a way of saying the variable or claiming the variable. Like scope switch language equals function. Bilingual, change the language. This right here is basically a function to change Breaze Home from being English to Espanol. That's what the function allows for the views to pop up and be controlled, and that's where the HTML shows that whole Spanish. The next topic is modules. Modules are basically containers. They're a collection of services, directives, controllers, filters, and configuration information. A module can be an application, or it can be a collection of components that can be injected into other modules. In Angular, that's the way you group related things together so you can benefit from its dependency injection system. Basically, modules consist of everything inside the project, basically. Or, better yet, is when you actually have a module name being called, and you have all the filters, directives, all the services and controllers within that module, is basically that's the full class. If you go under that Breeze Home desktop and you go to services, if you go to bilingual.js, this is basically a module inside the Breeze Home desktop that you'll use factory, which we'll discuss, the bilingual, and the function of the root scope, HTTP, and local storage. So basically, you already have the scopes, you have the services, you have everything inside this module. So basically, it's the class. And in terms of this JavaScript file, it's talking about the class in order to switch from English to Spanish. So you get to change the language in terms of when the user clicks on it, the language list, which there hasn't been more languages implemented yet, but that's how you get the HTTP call to the GET from the server. So everything changes from the local storage, from the root scope broadcast, language change, return the response. If not, error. Don't worry about the console log. The console log is a way of telling the web page if you have found this, if this function is actually working. For example, by putting a console log in a function, you'll see if the function is actually being called. And in this case, if I clear console and I click English, Spanish, nothing is being called. If I click the search, you see there's an error. But basically, to inform you guys, the console and putting console log is actually a good way to see if your function is actually being called. As I mentioned, we will talk about factories, services, and providers. There are methods towards creating and registering services. Factories are easy and popular since creating and configuring services because all that it needed to do is create an object and add properties to it, then return the same object and pass the factory into the controller. For example, when the language, we basically created language as an object and had a difference between English and Spanish, and we return the same object by the function of the controller. So if you want to actually click English, it will happen English. If you have Spanish, it will click to Spanish. Services create a service that is instantiated with the new keyword, which is where properties and methods for services have this dot, kind of like in Java. So when you actually claim a variable, it's this dot equals that, directly as a keyword. Provider is a way of passing into the app.config portion of the application, which can alter some configuration of service object before it is available everywhere else in the application. As you can see from this formative picture, if you go module, from the module to the config to the routes, it'll go to the controller. We already spoke about scopes, and the scopes is what connects the view to the controller. The view goes to directives, but now in controller is where you have the factory, the service, the providers, and the values. This is basically where everything inside of a controller is going to be actually called. The last topic for this video is routes. Routes are used to navigate to different pages in the application. It has an ng route module, which is basically a directive, which routes the application to different pages without reloading the entire application and maintains the application to a single page application. It uses the route provider to configure different routes and can define what page to display when a user clicks a link. There are two different methods when it's used to navigate to the page when there is a match, and otherwise is a default route method when none of the other routes have been called. So as seen in the picture, the index.html, it's the placeholder of the ng view. So now the index in HTML is going to have an about us and it's going to have a contact us. When you click on it, it's going to redirect you to another page. If you click on about us, it's going to redirect you to about us view. If you click on contact us, it's going to click to contact us view. In terms of Breaze Home, we look at app.js, which is under scripts, under Breaze Home desktop, which is written and configured in function to load a routing module that acts based as a URL, a way the user interacts with the web application. So basically here you have all the modules, and here is a .config function. the routes provider, as we discussed from the slides. And these are the different types of routes. So from the view landings page, when you click about, you go to about. When you click on landing, you go to landing. When you click on files, you go to files. You click on tests, you go to tests. Themes, you go to themes. It's basically a way that whatever link you actually click, it's going to head to that page. This is actually the controller's name and the controller as landing or about or whatever you're trying to define. I find AngularJS to be very interesting and complex in the aspect of its features and concepts, but just like anything else, it has its disadvantages. Some of its disadvantages. Angular is big and complicated since there are multiple ways to do the same thing. It gets challenging when trying to perform a specific task, especially when trying to merge code. Angular is complex, therefore to master you really need to read the code. Compile can be a really big headache. In terms of Breaze Home, which is a big web application, I recommend you guys to actually go over and read what you're actually doing. Angular implementations scale poorly, which means throwing away existing implementations and replacing them with new implementation and approaches. The complexity of AngularJS can be poor due to high volume and UI page, especially big data grids and lists. That's when the web page actually starts lagging. Therefore, Angular 2 and V4 were made. Angular 2 and TypeScript are bringing true object-oriented web development to the mainstream in a syntax that is completely rewritten from AngularJS. Angular 2 is not an MVC framework, but rather a component-based framework. It's an application closely to a tree having loosely coupled components. Angular 4 or V4 is the update of AngularJS 2, just named as Angular. Just like all technologies, things are going to always get enhanced, and therefore after AngularJS 1, AngularJS 2 is made and V4 is made, and so on. Well, this concludes my video about AngularJS using Breaze Home as an example. I hope you guys like this video and hopefully it helps you guys understand at least the basics of our front-end development using AngularJS and Breaze Home. If you have any questions regarding to Breaze Home 4.0, feel free to contact me or Dr. Masoud Sajadi. The information is presented on the screen. Thank you for listening and have a good one.